Okay, I think we can get started and let the rest of the audience join whenever they are ready. So delighted to be here today. Over the next 45 minutes to an hour, myself and Della will be covering the topic of how to invest in climate resilient infrastructure. Before we get started with the hopefully helpful and juicy content, let's go through some housekeeping rules. If you have a question for myself or Della, please do type it into the chat box. At the end of the webinar, we will answer as many questions as time permits. This webinar will be recorded, and if you do have any further questions or need additional information about EarthScan, please contact us at sales@earth-scan.com. So the plan of this session, in fact, Della and I were just talking, the point is to share best practices. We're here to learn, share, discuss challenges, and have an open conversation. I'm going to spend the first 10 minutes running through a few slides about how to incorporate climate risk assessment into investment processes and how to build climate resilience with our platform EarthScan. We're then, Della and I are going to have a very open discussion and talk about Fengate and some of Della and her team's case studies, and then open up for Q&A time. A little bit of introduction to who we are. My name is Kate Roger. I'm the head of climate risk at EarthScan. I've been working with EarthScan since 2019. I have a career in working in commercial roles across AI and deep tech with an utter focus on physical risk for the last 5 years. And over to you, Della.
Wonderful. Hi, everyone. Della. I'm Fengate's Director of ESG with a background in decarbonization and climate risk management, and really excited to join Kate today in this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Della. So let's move on. Okay, so incorporating climate risk assessment into your investment processes. I think, as we talked about, the main topic here is building resilience across your entire investment lifecycle. So the first question is, what is resilience? According to the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, resilience is the ability of a system and its component parts to anticipate, absorb, accommodate, or recover from the effects of a hazardous event in a timely and efficient manner, including through ensuring the preservation, restoration, or improvement of its essential basic structures and functions. So when we're thinking about resilient infrastructure, we're thinking about infrastructure that can withstand or recover rapidly from the effects of climate-related events, such as prolonged heat waves, flooding, and windstorms. When we think about the climate impact on infrastructure, it can cause many different types of risks to different types of infrastructure. The first risks are both direct and indirect risks. So natural hazards, such as flooding, can cause direct damage to your assets, but can also lead to downstream economic and social disruptions through infrastructure networks that we are also reliant upon today. Our existing infrastructure has not been built to withstand the extremities that we're now seeing. So when we're thinking about building new infrastructure or investing in existing infrastructure, we need to ensure that it can continue to operate under the more volatile and more extreme conditions that we're expected to see between now and the end of the century and continuing. I do think that when we talk a lot about the impact of climate on infrastructure, there is an immediate default to the risks. But of course, there are opportunities in this. And I think it's important to note the opportunity when it comes to building resilient infrastructure. The immediate opportunity that we can think of is in the energy sector when we think about green energy infrastructure, which is so critical to our path to net zero. So we need to ensure resilient infrastructure across the likes of solar farms, wind farms, etc. So identifying the risks in the infrastructure sector, we've broken this down into 3 types of infrastructure. Of course, there are many. The first type of infrastructure we can look at is transportation. Transportation includes the likes of roads, bridges, and rails. Their lifespan varies. For roads, you can go up to about 2 decades for a lifespan, and bridges over 100 years. And you think about the climate risks for these type of infrastructure, and you think about deterioration caused by extreme temperatures or erosion caused by flooding, storm surges, and sea level rise. For energy infrastructure, which again can include things like assets like high voltage transformers, transmitters, and generator plants, their lifespan can range anywhere between 40 and 80 years. Climate risks can cause service disruptions, reductions in transmission efficiency due to increased temperatures. And then there is a compound impact as well, as increased prolonged temperatures also means higher demands on the infrastructure. And then there is the direct damage from the likes of acute hazards like flooding and wildfires that can cause damage to utility poles, for example. So climate adaptation solutions are cost effective. I think when we have a lot of these discussions, if you go to panels or webinars and we talk, leaders of ESG talk about climate, the default is often to talk about decarbonization strategies. But we do need to think about building resilience and thinking about adaptation. In the long run, it costs the costs of climate-related events will far, far outweigh the costs of trying to tackle it. And in conversations that myself and our team at EarthScan are having with asset managers, sustainability leaders, people are seeing the financial implications and disruption increasing across their portfolios. And you can see this in the stats from the Economist Intelligence here. 30% of the world's total stock of manageable assets are estimated to be wiped out by the end of this century. And actually, the survey that Capgemini ran with over 500 business leaders, I think is pretty important to see that this is an immediate problem for business leaders. So 48% of business leaders believe that climate change will cause the majority of operational disruptions in the coming decade. Often climate and the impacts of climate were thought to be 20, 30 years out, but now this being one of the most critical problems for operational continuity to business leaders is very key. And the return on investment for climate adaptation is estimated by the World Resources Institute to be for each $1 invested in climate adaptation translates to $2 to $10 of net economic benefits for investors. And there are other benefits and opportunities as well. So ultimately, we need to talk about financial returns and climate risks. All of the risks we talked about were impact on returns. But the benefits are creating an increased reliability of service. So reducing the frequency and the severity of disruption caused by physical risks that are locked in. Increasing the asset lifespan. So reducing the repair and the maintenance costs, which are inevitable, and reducing the risk of any assets within your portfolio or any asset that you're looking to invest in becoming prematurely obsolete. Another benefit is increasing the service efficiency. And then finally, there is the ultimate benefit, which a lot of the people on this call are sustainability stakeholders, which is the benefit to building resilience across the likes of renewable energy infrastructure. So there are benefits to biodiversity loss, reducing biodiversity loss, and helping with climate mitigation strategies. So how do our customers use EarthScan to incorporate climate risk analysis? So first of all, what is EarthScan? EarthScan is a climate risk intelligence platform. It helps our customers analyze, report, and act upon their exposure to climate risk. Our customers are using EarthScan to build climate risk through 3 use cases. Our customers are embedding the physical risk outputs into their pre-transaction due diligence processes. So the ability to upload large portfolios of assets on a global scale and understand where there are risks and opportunities across that portfolio, understand where those risks are and how they change through time, and embed it into that due diligence, the traditional due diligence process. Is this too risky for us to invest in? If there is risk, can we mitigate that risk? There is also more, as we all know, more reporting pressures to ESG stakeholders. They come from mandatory reporting frameworks like TCFD, now ISSB, standards 1 and 2, and EU disclosure frameworks like CSRD. We're helping our users by automating some of the physical risk components of those reporting frameworks, and also automating the ability to share insights with internal and external stakeholders, because there's more B2B pressure when it comes to reporting. And finally, most importantly, and hopefully what Della and I will get into the most, is embedding this into actions. How do we build resilience through adaptation strategies? So once our customers have understood where there is risk, potentially increased temperatures or increased heat wave length days, then they can embed that into how do we reduce the risk of that. EarthScan at a glance, we have hazard types. These hazard types include heat stress, drought. Oh, sorry, it's skipping. 1 second. Heat stress, drought, wildfire, coastal and riverine flooding, extreme wind and precipitation. We have these hazard types across 3 different climate scenarios. We have a rating system, and for those acute hazards, we also have climate value at risk, so the impact quantification. Our customers can look at their baseline, their risks from 1970 up until now, and then look forward in 5-year time increments, which is incredibly important when we're talking about the lifespan of infrastructure assets or your holding period for certain investments. It's a, excuse me, it's an incredibly easy platform to use. I think this is one of the USPs here. So a lot of our customers come in, upload the assets they want to assess, look at the insights, download the insights, share the insights with external stakeholders, and make decisions without any interaction with someone from EarthScan. And we have over 22,000 data points per asset. So there's a lot of information in there to dissect and share with those stakeholders. And then we have science at the backbone of everything we do. So I think that's really, really important, because often you see a fancy platform, but we have a team of scientists that are constantly validating, assessing the best available data sets, how we can ingest them, and then finally how we can help our customers understand and translate the outputs that we have on EarthScan. This is a screenshot of EarthScan just to show you. We have global coverage, and it's a standardized resolution across anywhere on Earth. As you can see at the top, you've got your climate scenarios, different risk categories, and the ability to change the years. It's all dynamic. And then on the right-hand side, you have the ability to get decision useful insights and download and share those with the relevant stakeholders. Final part from me, and this is just to show that we work with many different types of organizations. This is a quote from Riyadh, who is the head of ESG at Arden Infrastructure Partners, who's been working with EarthScan for over a year now, saying, using EarthScan, we're able to run a climate assessment at any point across our investment geography within a matter of minutes. This has significantly improved the quality of our ESG reporting within the due diligence process. Thank you for my time. I'm sure most people came to hear the conversation between myself and Della. So Della, I'd love to hand over to you, and if you could introduce yourself a bit more, and also Fengate.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kate. And hi, everyone. Thanks again for allowing me to be here to have a conversation with you. So Fengate Asset Management is a North American mid-market investment manager. We have over $8 billion Canadian dollars of assets under management, focusing on infrastructure, private equity, and real estate strategies. And this equates to roughly over $35 billion in Canadian of asset value, mostly represented by wind and solar assets, real estate, social and transportation, and digital infrastructure. As you can tell by the description of the assets in that mix, these are long-lived assets that are very essential to economic and social welfare, and therefore it's really important to us as investment managers to explore the impact of evolving risks such as climate change that could pose a potential impact on the operations or the structural integrity, both within the investment period as well as beyond when we think about buyers after disposition. Fengate's infrastructure investments both support the mitigation and adaptation actions against climate change. So through our investments in clean technology like wind, solar, and battery storage assets, as well as investments in climate resilient and sustainable infrastructure, which will deliver sustainable long-term value to our stakeholders.
Thank you, Della. Let's move into the Q&A section. So how do you integrate climate risks into your overall investment strategy and process?
Yeah, and I think the key word here is integrate into existing processes rather than creating new systems and new processes, which can be daunting and also confusing for investment folks who have done things in a similar way for a long time. The goal for us is how do we treat these risks as a core part of risk register. As we see, climate risk is interdependent and oftentimes influence your legal, operational, and financial risks. So it cannot be evaluated in a silo. We often see that climate could have a huge impact on ability to obtain financing, refinancing, impact on insurance costs, and operating disruptions. So for us, it all starts at the screening and due diligence phase. As Arjun Infrastructure also quoted earlier, the deal team evaluates potential investments based on potential exposure to climate risks and opportunities. What's really exciting to us with working with EarthScan is that in the past, we were very limited to historical and current climate data to inform on design considerations. And we're aware that this may not be indicative of the risks over a longer term holding period as climate risks continue to evolve. So thanks to EarthScan, having forecasted data for these hazard metrics over 5, 10, 20, 50 years is able to help us enhance our ability to stress test our assumptions for very granular assets, pinpoints, and location. For example, we not only look at whether a site has flooded in the past, we can look at whether it's exposed to potential flooding risk in 20 to 30 or 40 years. I'll give you an example of how we do that. So take a real estate investment that we're currently evaluating. We take the coordinates of the locations of those potential investments and we run it through EarthScan. And as Kate has mentioned, it's as simple as uploading the coordinates without having to go back and forth with consultants or EarthScan representatives. We then toggle on the tool a few scenarios such as business as usual or Paris aligned, and also timeframes, either aligned to our holding period or even beyond that. What it'll tell us is not only an exposure rating, but also the underlying metrics related to those hazards. So we not only know if flooding risk is high, we now know exactly what the maximum flooding levels could be for a 2, 5, or 100-year event. We can then take that information to assess the vulnerability of that asset against those hazard categories, whether it's based on asset type, if the real estate asset has a basement, existing adaptation measures such as flood barriers, on-site drainage, slope direction, slope levels of the ground. All of those things will help us understand the riskiness of an asset based on that tool. We also use the tool to conduct climate risk assessment once an investment goes into our portfolio on an ongoing basis. And we think that's really important because climate models and science continues to evolve. This is a really good opportunity for us to create a dialogue with our asset management team and operators to ensure that we incorporate any necessary adaptation measures into ongoing maintenance capital or operating budgets. Hopefully that helps, but for us, it's really a life cycle process, and having EarthScan at the sort of tip of our fingers allows us to do that sort of on an ongoing basis.
Amazing. Do you mind if I ask if you could, so you talked about uploading the coordinates, doing a bit of risk assessment on EarthScan, you being the ESG director, who do you share the outputs with, and what do the outputs look like?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting, right? What we're able to do with EarthScan is the tool is not only limited to those that are climate professionals. We're seeing that as investment teams sit with the ESG team to go through this process together, they're also learning about climate acumens and the way that they can use the tool themselves. And so it's really a process that starts with the investment team. We come in with guidance and professional judgment, but they're really the ones running the process. And we have design builders and third-party developers who we work with in this process as well. So that's the type of information we're able to share externally as well as internally to make decisions.
Great. We'll get on to the next question, but there's a lot that I want to unpack there. You mentioned that you before EarthScan, you using historical data. Can I ask what the driver was to look for a tool like EarthScan?
Yeah, for sure. So I think you're seeing a lot of external pressures to improve the quality and the methodology of climate risk assessment. The more sort of publications come out around how risks can evolve drastically over time, the more apparent it became that historical data no longer informs future risk levels. When you look at the pathways of climate or in degrees Celsius, it really is a material difference in what you can expect from these physical hazards and transition risks as well, which means that it's an obvious indicator we need to look beyond the time frame that we have historically looked at. Our investors are demanding the same, our peers are doing the same. I'm sure our customers and our stakeholders are also expecting the same. So it really was a no-brainer for us to do this.
Great, thank you. So I think you've touched a lot about the process, but we'd love to hear some examples. And I think often these conversations lack examples. So could you share some examples of how you've built climate resilience into your investment strategy and any projects or actions you've taken to enhance climate resilience within your portfolio?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can, again, talk about a few assets that we're currently looking at. As we expand beyond the geographies that we're familiar with, I think that becomes even more important because the risks are unknown. So for 2 real estate properties that we're looking at outside of our typical geographic scope, we plug those data points in and realize there's a heightened precipitation risk as a result of flash flooding that usually occurs in that region. So based on EarthScan's data, we were able to extract the forecasted flooding levels in millimeters. And we shared this information within the investment team, but also with other third-party stakeholders who then engaged a stormwater management consultant. This is in addition to the environmental site assessments that's typically done at this stage. So now it's a very targeted technical assessment specifically looking at flood management. And what that'll help us do is investigate whether those sites have existing adaptation measures, and if so, are there also appropriate insurance policies in place to protect us? If not, do we need to budget in retrofit costs into the underwriting so that we can start to plan for those activities post-investment? On the dual side of things, in addition to physical climate risk, we identified that these assets had a higher carbon intensity than the CRREN pathway guidance. And so we leveraged an ASHRAE Level 2 energy audit and identified energy conservation measures and budgeted those retrofit costs along with other sort of physical climate risk sort of retrofit costs into the underwriting to anticipate those future regulatory risks as well. So that's a really good example of how thinking about these things early and ensuring that we can quantify some of the costs and benefits of mitigation and adaptation can help. It makes that conversation much easier in 1, 2, 3 years time when you have to do something like this. The costs were already sort of anticipated for. I can take another solar asset as an example. We've seen the introduction even before this EarthScan, but the industry is moving in this direction where there's additional weatherproofing on solar assets to ensure that mechanical components are built to withstand extreme temperatures, and for us, particularly up to 60 degrees. So while this asset is in a location with heat stress up to 44.6 degrees Celsius, which EarthScan was able to tell us in a 100-year return period, granted, that's quite hot for anybody or anything, and it's not a great news. But for this particular asset, we had the confidence that the asset was not going to experience any material impacts on operations. On the flip side, heat also impacts the performance of these solar assets, which is important to embed in those production forecasts as well. So those are a few examples.
Great, thank you. I think that when we think about climate, often the immediate thought is to go towards the acute hazards, which cause direct damage to infrastructure, and chronic hazards like prolonged heat waves are overlooked. But there are huge financial implications of prolonged heat waves, especially to infrastructure assets. There are, of course, opportunities as well when you think about solar farms and solar infrastructure. But it's important to screen your portfolio, identify if there is a problem, and then, as you said, go do that deep dive investigation to understand whether adaptation is required. So how do you balance the potential returns? This is a tricky question, but how do you balance the potential returns with the risks posed by climate change when selecting investments? Have climate risks blocked any potential investments or made you divest from assets within your portfolio?
Yes, Kate, definitely a tricky question. I think the word balance is the tough one. The key for us is how can we incorporate cost benefit analysis of climate risk adaptation into the underlying returns analysis. It sounds much easier than it is in practice. I'm sure that's the case for everybody who's trying to do this on the call. Because we're trying to deliver long-term sustainable value, it's no brainer to try to quantify risks similar to how you would with other risk elements, but it's much more difficult for climate and for two reasons. One is bridging the gap between the understanding of climate science, which has historically been very limited to few technical experts, to a table of investment professionals who work with financial models, where trade-off decisions are typically made on a monetary basis. And furthermore, underwriting models, valuation models have always placed value on reducing the margin of error in the forecasts and discount rate assumptions. Climate models, in contrast and potential impact it has on businesses, has a much larger range of uncertainty and range of potential outcomes. So this adds a bit of complication when we're trying to understand what exactly do you incorporate into the model where it's sensible and it can give you a relatively accurate forecast of the future. What I'll bring this back by saying is EarthScan has sort of helped us in translating climate risk into, for example, climate value at risk is a great example of how you're bridging the gap between climate science and holding value or equity value. In our real estate team, what we've done is we built a proprietary ESG due diligence tool. It has a risk scoring system, which now we've incorporated EarthScan's rating system into. This helps the investment team sort of prioritize assets with a heightened ESG risk and balance that risk against the returns when they look at investment decisions. So that's on your first question. I think the short answer to this question is there's no right way to do this, and it's what your company and what your teams are comfortable with, and it will take iterations and cycles to get this right and get the teams comfortable, but perfection really shouldn't block progress, and so start where you can and sort of progress from there. In terms of divestments, I'd like to think that our roles in the investment space is to add value rather than avoid risks. So we look for ways to identify assets that may be vulnerable, but how can we use our capital and our knowledge and our understanding to enhance the asset, both for ourselves and long-term value creation, but for the society that it's delivering benefits and value to. And if there's no other option, perhaps divestment is an option, but we would say typically the first choice is to improve rather than divest.
Great. A couple of follow-up questions to that. So the first stage, I guess the due diligence stage, where you're looking at taking outputs from EarthScan and feeding it into your own proprietary tool. How long is that process? Is it as long as the deals team gives you, or does it typically take a couple of weeks, a month to be able to run that?
Yeah, well, the using EarthScan itself is very quick, and I think that's the value of it. The danger comes in overestimating how easy it is and just take the risk score at face value and say, bam, that's our risk, right? That's the danger when it comes to simplifying things too much. And so we like to bring EarthScan in as early as possible as our first assessment, and then take those underlying metrics and do more due diligence, which might take longer, right? When you're talking about bringing in a third-party technical consultant, etc. I'd say we failed if we did this maybe a week before it goes to investment committee, because you have no time to react and no time to do further diligence.
Great. And then when you're looking at your existing portfolio and, as you said, trying to build resilience and continue to serve the community, how frequently would you do a portfolio resilience assessment? And how often would you have to kind of work with the team to think about adaptation measures?
Yeah, so we like to take advantage of the junctions where we have a dialogue around ESG data collection. So, for example, if we open up, the portal for ESG data collection in the Q1 of the year after following the reporting year, we think that's a really great opportunity when you're reviewing the data they provided to also share information on the climate risk assessment that you're doing. So this happens annually, but as climate models get updated, as EarthScan improves, as our methodology improves, that may be more frequent, but once a year makes a lot of sense for us at the moment based on the timing of our other ESG related engagements.
Great. Just before I move on to the next question, just to remind people that if they do want to ask a question, please do so in the chat. What is the expected return on investment of building climate resilience within your portfolio? And do you encounter any internal or external pushback?
Yeah, I think I'm repeating myself a bit, but the opportunity really is, how do you quantify and dollarize climate risk in a way that everyone understands, right? Because the expected return on investment of climate resilience is often different than the assumptions you use for your typical financial modeling assumptions. So, for example, we look at what's the potential revenue loss due to days of operating disruption under a do-nothing scenario, the impact of sustained heat wave on energy costs, or even human health, as an example, if you're working with in the healthcare industry. Climate value at risk as a percentage of asset value is a great example due to potential structural damages, and even the potential impact on exit value if a buyer are scrutinizing your assets the same way that you are, right? So these are some of the ways that we're beginning to think about quantifying climate risk in a way where you're not running into the question of, okay, well, how does this impact our investment? When you're dealing with investment professionals, money is the denominating factor.
Of course.
I will say, though, that physical climate risk analysis still constitutes a major challenge for many financial institutions and investors. This is, I believe, historically due to a wide range of factors, but specifically like slow emergence of analytical tools like EarthScan. And so it really does help when we do have a tool like this, we can have a third-party opinion come in and help inform. And so that it's not the ESG team saying, we think there's a risk, we have climate models to back some of our claims and statements. And lastly, as I was saying, the key is to not let the idea we need to get this perfect get into the way of let's just start to try. The whole value we're trying to embody is being honest and being humble in the way we talk about our progress, communicating the limitations and the assumptions in our methodology, data availability, both internally and externally, can be very helpful in building up that trust and that reliability of the analysis over time.
Great. It's absolutely key. I think when you think about climate science, uncertainty has got to be our friend. And we have to just make it as accessible as possible and be very transparent about limitations. There is no perfect solution out there. So would you say your recommendation is that ESG professionals take outputs from tools like EarthScan and then put it into languages that's more relatable, I guess, to investment teams?
Yeah, that's correct. And I think it's the so what piece that oftentimes we get asked, okay, so EarthScan rating says E. Okay, so a flood inundation level say this. What does that mean? And so translating it into line items on your forecasted cash flows, potential impact on discount rate, cost of debt, exit value, it all is very valuable. And like I said, there isn't a one approach fits all or a specific rate you need to use, but just starting to bridge that gap can be very helpful.
Brilliant, thank you. And the policy landscape is getting ever more complex. So what changes in policy or regulation do you hope to see that could impact the future of climate resilient infrastructure investments?
Yeah, for sure, Kate. And I think at the jurisdictional levels across Europe, but also here at home in Canada, we're already seeing a push towards incorporating climate resilience into green building standards, building code levels, etc. However, I'd like to sort of look at this in a different angle. If instead of relying on policy or regulations, I think industry players and these forums can play a huge role in spearheading the change, because this is where innovation usually stems. Benchmarks such as LEED, GRESB, CSRD, IIGCC, TCFD, all the acronyms are all helping industry players understand best practices and share knowledge without waiting for legislation or policies to catch up and enforce these things. Oftentimes it's too late, right? And so it's very cool to see folks getting together on a voluntary basis to look at these issues.
Great. And how do you see the role of climate risks evolving in the asset management industry?
Yeah, I think without being too preachy, I think it's going to become more mainstream. And my goal with these webinars and collaborations that we're doing here is to demystify climate risk. And I hope the audience here are not just climate experts and are a mix of investment professionals and asset managers, because it will impact and all of your roles. I think with proper training and onboarding, really folks should be able to identify, assess, and manage climate risk and this could be foundational knowledge for investment and asset management professionals, rather than being the exclusive to a few at the table. So I think, again, back to EarthScan, it's really helped us do that. With the ease of the interface, we've seen our investment team actually get really excited to say, can we use this, instead of just, giving you something and you sending it back, that they can actually interact with the tool, and it kind of, again, demystifies the complexity of it all into something more digestible for the user.
So education, and then it's going to be mainstream.
Mainstream.
I like it. There's it depends on what event you're going to, whether it's going to be mainstream or not. But it's definitely, there's always some sort of stage at every event that's purely dedicated to ESG, and a large chunk on climate. I'm going to open the floor to any questions. I'm not sure if we have any yet, but please feel free to write any questions. And if not, I'll just hold her for a second. I will wait for a second to see if there are any questions. If not, I will just hand over to you. Oh, I see somebody typing. And apologies, Roberta. I see that you can only see the screen but not focus on the presentation slides. I hope that wasn't the case for everybody. I think, Della, the question, just to focus on that, is how do we make it mainstream? Because there is so much pushback for ESG. And as you said, the outputs are not in the same language as what most deals or investment teams are used to. So that bridge is so incredibly key. And I think that, the big goal of EarthScan is to make the outputs as accessible to somebody that doesn't have a climate science background, who actually hasn't worked in the climate risk world, and who is maybe even new to ESG and has a very long to-do list that also incorporates very complex assessments of climate risks. And so it's a massive part of our strategy. But we also need many more conversations like this to share best practices, learnings, how we overcome some of those challenges. So ears open, eyes open.
That's right.
What data, should we ask Della what data we base our climate risk assessment on? Do you know?
Yes, Yes, IPCC, International Panel on Climate Change, releases climate models like the CM. You're testing me now. CMP6, which is, I think, just published. CIMP 5 was released a couple of years ago. 6 just came out, and that's where the climate science and very detailed, complex modeling comes from. I've tried, believe me, to try to get to the source data and make some sense of it all, but that did not work to my benefit. So definitely EarthScan being able to sort of process that data has been extremely helpful.
Thank you. I definitely put you on the spot there. It's also a combination of ground truth data, so weather station data, satellite imagery. We've built our own digital terrain model, so we can understand topography and elevation at a global scale. A lot of climate science sits at quite low resolution, 100 kilometer by 100 kilometer grids. And of course, when we're thinking about infrastructure, we need to go down to very, very high resolution. So the USP here is to downscale down to that 90 meter or 130 meter resolution. So you can actually get granular decision useful outputs that you can feed into adaptation decision making. One thing, just to the reason why I put Della on the spot, because she's an EarthScan user, is it is absolutely key for us to be very, very transparent about the data sources, how often they're updated, the downscaling methodology, and also the kind of the rating system we have on top, which is the ability to interpret those metrics as well. So we have a knowledge base within the product. Sorry, Della, were you going to say anything?
No, well, I was just thinking, like, there's so many, and that's what's so great is it's not just the sort of temperature-based models. It's also like the Globio riverine models and wildfire index models. There's so many different models that EarthScan kind of incorporates into its tool that it's really hard to replicate and very useful for us.
Thank you. We have a question, which I think we've touched upon a little bit, but we've probably focused more on internal reporting. So the question says, what challenges arise when communicating climate risk to both internal and external stakeholders? I think we've discussed the pressure when discussing with maybe the deals team, but any pressure or challenges when reporting to external stakeholders, investors?
I think the challenge is it's so complicated and nuanced when each of the asset types are slightly different, locations are slightly different. If you look at a linear asset, across that linear line, exposure may be different. Communicating for us to external investors in a way that makes sense, not too complicated, but sophisticated enough to capture all the details has been something we're grappling with. So in our reporting, we try to keep everything at a high level in a way that makes sense, but then you're, gracing over a lot of the specific details that you may want to touch upon, the limitations, the nuance. So I think it's a matter of being able to educate and inform at the same time. And we've been trying to have one-on-one conversations as a result of that with our key investors to talk about our methodology, to go into a little bit more depth on, okay, this is how we thought about doing it. Do you have any feedback for us? So that two-way loop cycle has been very beneficial because they will say, well, that piece wasn't as clear for us, or you didn't really touch on this, and we can kind of evolve. So that has been a really helpful process to open up sort of a two-way dialogue with external parties to get feedback.
Thanks, Della. We have a question on the other side of the coin for climate risk, transition risk, and how this tool can help internal and could you speak to transition risk and how this tool can help internal and external stakeholders with decision making? So I'll touch upon transition risk and this tool, and then maybe the latter part of the question, Della, you can pick up. So EarthScan is solely looking at physical risk at this stage. EarthScan is developed by a business called Motigo, and we are a team of about 70 people solely dedicated to the climate risk sector. We have a large roadmap of how we can continue to improve our physical risk offering, but we know transition risk is, of course, very, very important, both for reporting, but also that resilience piece. So it is definitely something we are thinking about, and will at some point probably be updating people on that. And maybe Della, the second part about communicating climate risks, I think you've covered that for internal, external stakeholders. I think we'll go to the last question here. I was just wondering if you plan to already do use AI machine learning in your physical climate risk assessments and analysis, e.g. patching of data or calculating future projections. Yes, so I can cover this. And I don't know whether you also use any other AI tools, Della, but EarthScan is built on the backbone of best-in-class climate science. So we use the best available data sources that most climate scientists use. Della mentioned CMIP6 and the IPCC. We also use artificial intelligence to downscale for transfer learning, where there's data scarcities in certain geographies, and also that digital terrain model that we talked about, which is a global digital terrain model where we can look at elevation, topography at a 90-meter resolution all over the world. So there is artificial intelligence based within the outputs to downscale and create those high resolution outputs for our users. Do we have time for one more question? When it comes to, we'll answer one more question here. When it comes to actionable steps to give to your clients to mitigate or adapt to climate risk, what does that involve? And do you see startup solutions playing a part in helping your customers implement those suggestions? At this stage, EarthScan is a diagnosis tool. We help our customers assess, understand, report on, and act upon their exposure to climate risks. What we don't do and what we can't do at scale, because we work with multiple different industries at a global scale, is offer asset level adaptation recommendations. As Della talked about earlier, Della is able to screen her portfolio, identify where there are risks, and sometimes bring in those on-site engineers. And at this stage, a software solution like EarthScan cannot replace the asset level mitigation pieces. But I do think that startup solutions could be an absolute key tool to helping customers implement suggestions and adaptation measures and recommendations. But it's just not there yet with that diagnosis tool. Any final comments from you, Della? If not, we will switch off for the day.
No additional comments besides to say, again, thank you for having me here, and really in the spirit of sharing knowledge. So if anybody wants to talk about this subject after the call, I'm sure Kate can share both of our details, and really welcome the network and the collaboration in this because we're all learning at the same time. So. Yes.
Thank you. I want to extend my thanks to you, Della. It's been a really fruitful conversation. If there are more questions, please do share them to sales@earth-scan.com, and we'll also share our emails here. Thank you for your time, and hopefully speak to you all soon. Bye.
Bye.